Welcome back to CIS 101. Last week, we talked a little bit in Chapter 4 about the characteristics of application software in general. We looked a little bit at the variety of types of application software. We talked about a little bit about word processing, which you're just finishing up with. Talked a little about spreadsheets, which we're starting to get into now. Talked a little bit about databases, which we will get into later in the semester. And we talked a little bit about presentation graphics, which we will get into later in the semester. And we talked a little bit about graphics and multimedia software and some of the other types of application software. Bear in mind that with many of the things we're going to go over, we are doing what's called a mile wide and an inch deep. We're going to cover a broad range, but because of time constraints, we just can't cover everything in the detail to which we could in a more focused class. Chapter 5 addresses system software, specifically the operating system, utility programs, and file management. Okay, and we are going to start off by talking about the operating system fundamentals, what the operating system does, and starting your computer. And the reason you want to know this stuff, or a reason why it behooves you to learn this stuff, to read the material, to do the labs, is, and this is an ad from the Chicago Tribune, notice how they want someone with computer skills, and specifically they want Microsoft access. Okay, and this is very, very common. Another way to look at it, again, from a computer user standpoint, is somebody who knows their way around Microsoft Word has a wide range of employment opportunities and employment expectations is another way of looking at it. Looking at the salary.com results for the Chicago area, if you know Word, the range of opportunities for a person who knows Word range from administrative assistant making about $38,000 a year, all the way through office manager making about $44,000 a year, through mechanical engineer making about $70,000 a year. Okay, learn your way around Excel and the opportunities available to a person. Move up to include things like a financial analyst making $60,000 a year, a staff accountant making $50,000 a year, and a mechanical engineer, again, that's part of their skill set, still making about $70,000 a year. Okay, and because this is what I do, I would really urge everybody to consider dipping your toe in the water and thinking about becoming a software engineer. It's not for everybody, but if it turns out to be something that you don't hate doing, it's something that you can do. Just like most of us don't like digging a ditch, but most of us can dig a ditch if we think that there's a reason why we would want to. Okay. The bottom 10% of software engineers make about $60,000 a year, which is the minimum, which is the average household income last year before COVID in the U.S. That's not bad for the low end of a software engineer. The middle range is going to be about $84,000 a year, and the high end, you're going to be making about more than six figures. And the reason for that is, and we will blow into this a little bit more when we get into programming, it's not really, it's like using Word, it's like using Excel. There's a perception that it's much more difficult than it really is. There's a perception that it involves doing things that it really doesn't. And again, we will blow more into that down the road. All we want to do in this chapter is basically get a feel for how, what an operating system is and how it works in general. And I want to stress to you, okay, no matter what you're doing, okay, stick to it. Persistence, the main reason why a lot of companies, even when a job does not require a college degree, they like to see a college degree. They like to see that college certificate, is because it demonstrates persistence. It shows that you are willing to, even when you don't want to, okay, stick to doing things that need to be done. If you've ever been at work at some place where somebody just didn't show up, and you know what kind of a chaos it can cause for the people who are there trying to get the job done, you know exactly what I mean. And notice that of a survey that was done of over 300 community colleges in the U.S., Triton was ranked number 25 nationally and ranked #1 in Illinois for graduate salaries. This is not a bad thing. Is it MIT or Harvard? No. But of all the community colleges in Triton College, and a lot of our classes transfer to the four-year schools, it's ranked #1, and there are worse things to be ranked. Little bit of administrative heads up when you're submitting some assignments. Don't compress your files. Don't try to send me a zip folder or a zip file. Okay, yes, it's kind of neat and kind of cool, but I don't know what's in them. And as we get into the class more, you'll understand why. Is there anything in there except the file? Probably not. But every now and then, unbeknownst to the sender, a virus can sneak its way in, and it's much harder to detect when it's in a zip file. So don't send me any zip files. Also, notice that with week 5, okay, the attendance potential bumped up from 7 points a week, from 6 points a week to 7 points a week, and that's because we wanted to come out at an even 100. So for the first 4 weeks, it was 6 points, and for the rest of the semester, it's going to be 7 points. Nothing has changed. It's simply that from an attendance standpoint, you can now get up to 7 points instead of 6. Also, bear in mind that every now and then, it happens to all of us, it happens to me, if you're trying to get some work done and the Triton portal is down, be patient. It will come back up again. They work it's not Google, it's not YouTube, but they work very hard, not eBay, but they work very hard to try, to keep it up as close to 24/7 as they possibly can. And 24/7 is a goal. It's not necessarily reality. In the computer, in the information technology field, the goal for most companies, what most companies, hardware and software, brag about is what we call the 5 nines, being up more than 99% of the time. Because things do happen. Things are going to break. Nobody's fault. So just be patient. And there'll be no harm, no foul. And nobody's going to jump up and down and say, oh, it's your fault. You shouldn't do it. Having said that, there are some browsers you really want to kind of avoid using. Internet Explorer is certainly one of them. It tends not to work well with Blackboard, so please don't use the Internet Explorer browser. Okay, things we're going to talk a little bit about today regarding operating system fundamentals include discussing the functions of an operating system. We're going to talk a little about the different kinds of operating systems for machines, for networks, for businesses. We're going to explain the most common operating systems for personal use. We're going to talk about how operating systems provide a means for users to interact with a computer. We're going to talk about how the operating system helps manage software, such as hardware, such as this processor, the memory, the storage, and the peripheral devices, and how the operating system interacts with application software, which is why we buy it in the first place, why we spend all this money on this stuff. And we're going to talk a little bit about the operating system and what the process it uses to start up the computer, okay, what we call the boot process. We briefly talked about this last week and repeat it again this week. It's well worth repeating. We basically are looking, when we're dealing with computers, at 2 types of software. Application software, like we talked a little bit about last week, and system software, which is what we're going to talk a little bit about this week. Within the system software, we also further subdivide it down into the operating system itself, which runs the device, runs the phone, runs the computer, and the utility programs that help us get around and do the things we want to do, like get into our pictures, get into our files, and put them where we want or bring them up so we can see them. When we talk about operating system fundamentals, there are some that that are focused on business use, like RTOS, for IBM, and the Unix system, which is also very popular, and we'll talk about some of the interesting aspects of that. And then we have operating systems for personal use, such as our smartphones or iPods. And they are generally, for smartphones, they're going to fall into the Android, iOS, or Windows family. And we also have, for our desktop and laptop computers, we will use some form of Windows, some form of the Mac or Apple OS, or some flavor of Linux, of which there's many flavors. There's many flavors of what we call distribution packages out there, but 2 seem to be becoming more and more widely adopted, and that's Ubuntu and that's Linux Ubuntu distribution package and the Linux Mint distribution package. Interestingly enough, Lenovo, which makes the ThinkPads, of which I think pretty highly of, I actually have a little bit of a hobby collecting them, is starting to get ready to start distributing laptops with the Linux Ubuntu distribution package. And they generally do a good job on most of, so if they're doing that, they must think it's about ready for the prime time. When you think about, from a user standpoint, individual as well as corporate, when you're thinking about which operating system to use, can be very helpful when you're looking at adopting something, to go into like companies like or websites like netmarketshare.com and see just what they're using. Okay, depending on how things are going, they can be more or less popular and dominant. Case in point, I just mentioned that 10 years ago, Linux Mint were known but quirky, and you would find them on fans and aficionado computers and not too many other places. And fast forward 10 years later, and we're at the point now where a major laptop computer company, Lenovo, is looking at distributing ThinkPads with the Linux Ubuntu operating system, installed and ready to go. Specifically, when we talk about the operating system, it provides, whether it's a phone or a computer or whatever, it could be your microwave oven. Okay, it provides the operating system that coordinates and directs the flow of data and information. It enables the user to interact with the computer, and the types of interfaces that generally will provide will be 1 to 3 types. It can be a command-driven interface. It can be a menu-driven interface, or it can be a graphical user interface, which is the one that we are increasingly used to thinking about. Also, get back to your microwave oven. It probably does not use a graphical user interface. It probably uses a command-driven interface or possibly a menu-driven interface. Okay. All types of operating systems are responsible for doing some basic things. They provide the interrupt handler, they handle the preemptive multitasking, and they provide the spooler. The interrupt handler is basically like the teacher or the teacher's aide at recess that basically interrupts activities that they don't want to be going on, like two kids that won't, kidding and, won't share something on the playground. They're responsible for preemptive multitasking, just like when we line up as kids at the water fountain in school on a hot day and everybody wants cool water, and somebody's taking really a lot longer at the water fountain than they should. And the teacher's aide will say, okay, you've had all you're going to get. Move along, let the next person go. They're basically interrupting the process. They're preemptively saying, okay, you're done, let the next person on. Or if somebody's got an emergency, they or have to go to the bathroom, they'll basically stop the class, say, okay, go to the bathroom, then come back. And then the spooler, okay, which basically is when all the information or all the data instruction set is basically going to be sent to a device to execute something. Maybe it's the monitor. Maybe you've got a document that you want to be printed. In both cases, the spooler basically gets the information all ramped up and ready to go, and then sends it, okay, to the device in question. It also handles the random access memory. It doesn't make it, but it basically manages it, okay. And it also has there's also a technique pretty uniformly found in all devices called virtual memory, which is simply borrowing some of the storage space, the drive space, and using it as a temporary hot swappable, if you will, extra space like a kitchen counter to help the RAM do its job. And basically it does all it's there for. All virtual memory does is basically increase the available RAM so that the operating device, the computing device of whatever type, can move a little faster than it might otherwise move. Operating systems also manage your device drivers, which basically every piece of hardware of every type has a device driver that tells it what to do, and it manages the plug and play aspects of all the hardware, which used to be not very well implemented. And a major part of an IT technician's job would be adding and installing hardware to where our operating systems increasingly recognize it, and generally, not always, will install the device driver for the hardware on their own. They're not perfect. And one of the reasons why Lenovo is getting ready to go with the Linux Ubuntu distribution is that the plug and play for Ubuntu has progressed to the point of where it's really pretty decent. Okay. When you start your computer up, or your phone, or whatever, or your microwave oven, or whatever, there's going to be what we call a boot process, which loads the operating system into the random access memory, telling the computer what to do and how to behave as a computer. Okay, and when we talk about this, we're getting into things like the Windows interface, file management, and utility programs. We talk about those. We're talking about the main features of the Windows interface, how the operating systems help keep your computer organized, how to view, how to sort, name, and manage files and folders. And this brings you back to the Windows Explorer chapter in your skills book, which basically is one of the very first chapters in your skills book, and it walks you through how to use Windows Explorer to manage your files. So we're going to talk a little bit about how file compression works. We're going to talk a little bit about the tools used to enhance system productivity. We're going to talk a little bit about the utilities that are used to back up and restore files and the computer system. And we're going to describe the assistive technology utilities that are available within the Windows operating system to make using the computer seem a little bit easier. And again, these aren't perfect, but they work pretty well. Most of us, and it's not an absolute, but most of us, if we're using Windows, we're using Windows 10. Some of us might be using an older operating system. I have actually a fair number of I have way too many computers to begin with, and a fair number of the computers I have are still using Windows 7 because it does some things, in my opinion, a little bit better than Windows 10. Plus, and you see this in companies all the time, but as an individual with really more computers than I should have, if I have Windows 7 and it's all paid for and it's doing everything I need to do, I'm very likely going to keep using it because it's all paid for. Why would I, why spend, money on something that I don't really need to buy yet? I'll wait until prices go down just a little bit more. When we talk about Windows 10, we will find it on our laptops, desktops, phones, and tablets, unless they're the Apple variety or the Google Chromebook. And basically, within Windows 10, there are 3 ways to accomplish our tasks. And this is a little bit of review from Chapter 2 of our Windows book, and really Chapter 1 as well. We can use the mouse. We can use the screen. If we have a touch screen, we can touch it. We can use keystrokes. Most of us are familiar with using a mouse, or if it's our phone, we may, just touch the screen. More and more of our phones are touch sensitive as well. There's also going to be a start menu over in the lower left-hand corner. It usually comes up on the left-hand side, and you can customize that or not depending on your particular druthers. I actually have not a bad habit. I have a habit because I'm used to the original Windows operating system going all the way back to Windows 3.1, that I have a little app that I install on my Windows 10 computers that basically gives it the look and feel of the classic Windows start menu, because I just find that comfortable. It doesn't really change anything. It's just that I like to use it. I'm comfortable with it. I know it, and there's no harm, no foul if I use it, so I do. If you grow up without using the classic Windows interface, you probably, would see that as not a plus but a minus. So you wouldn't want to use it. Since it's a free little app, it's no harm, no foul. Other operating systems have their own user interface. The Mac OS and Windows are not compatible, for example. They look a little bit the same, but they are not the same. Classic example of this, when I'm troubleshooting problems on our phones for myself and my son, they're both Android. It's not a problem. We get in there, we get everything done. When there are problems of any type with my daughter's iPhone, I basically have to have her there following the instructions because, once we get beyond a certain point, I have no idea, what they're talking about. It's not a nomenclature that I'm familiar with. And then there's also the Linux operating system, and there are several distribution packages of Linux. The Red Hat distribution package for businesses is very mature and well done. It costs a little bit of money, but the argument is it delivers a lot of value for the money that you're charging, and it's less expensive than the Windows licenses are going to be. And we're increasingly seeing the Linux Ubuntu and the Linux Mint operating systems become more and more capable as they become more and more mature. Okay, and in fact, Linux and Ubuntu are specifically designed to mimic the Windows and OS X operating systems to enhance the ease of use of the users. Okay, within the Windows operating system, and also true for Linux and for the various Mac operating systems, you're going to have some sort of file management tool. It's Windows Explorer within Windows, and this basically is an additional function of the operating system. It will show you and allow you to browse the organizational structure of the files, okay, which are generally going to be organized, and this was gone into within chapter 2 of your book, what in chapter 1 of what your yellow folders, your libraries, and your drives. And it also will show you your root directory, generally the C drive, but it doesn't have to be the C drive. And this is something we'll get into more later on in the class. We also use the Windows File Management tool, okay, Windows Explorer, to basically name our files, give them unique names, and hopefully ones that allow them to be more easily identified, because just the generic names randomly assigned by the computer can be a little confusing. They can also show you and allow you to change, if you wish, the file extension or file type, the letters that go after the dot or the period on any file type. Which gets us into naming conventions. They can use certain letters and characters, and there are certain ones they can't, like the diagonal slash they cannot use, and they can be up to 255 characters. And generally, most people have far less that, because 255 is a lot of characters. Okay, when you're working with your files and folders within the Windows file management system, it allows you to look at it a number of ways, and also provides you with the opportunity to give a preview of Office application files to help you further find what you're looking for, because you may have two files that sound a lot the same. For example, our Excel lab quiz is going to have a Word file, which is instructions, and then an Excel file, which is going to be the data sheet you're going to be working on. And they look in the naming convention almost the same, but using the file management tool, you can very quickly figure out, hey, one's a Word file and one's an Excel file, and they are obviously going to be quite different. And of course, the Windows Explorer, or the file management tool in Windows, or any of the operating systems that you can use to open, to copy, to cut, to rename, to delete, to send stuff to the recycle bin, get stuff out of the recycle bin. You can use it to compress files, which gives us back to, and that's a great way to save. That can be, if you're careful, a great way to save space. But the flip side of it is, I don't want you to submit any compressed files to me. Generally speaking, a lot of operating systems will do this for you automatically, and is essentially transparent to you and I, which is fine. They also provide utility programs that are incorporated in the operating system, such as Windows Defender and in the Windows 10 operating system, or other types of firewall/file security or software security programs, file compression utilities, or you can, and a lot of people do this, I do this, you can have standalone utility programs that are either in the public domain or freeware of some type, or possibly proprietary. But they do a specific thing, and they do it really well. I, for example, have an antivirus program that I like a lot. I use it in addition to Windows Defender, and I have a license that's good for 10 computers, which, since I have way too many at home, is really kind of handy for me. Utility programs which are also built into the Windows operating system. They include tools for disk cleanup, for task manager, and for a disk defragmenter, which allows you to defragment your disk. And we'll talk a little bit more about those. Tools include your Windows Explorer to show you your file history, and a system restore capability in case you find, and every now and then this can happen, that something has happened to your system, you're not real happy with it, you downloaded some software to try it out and it sounded like the greatest thing since sliced bread, or you installed a new piece of hardware in your system because it sounded really cool, and your system has just never worked right since you did that, and you can utilize a file restore to basically revert your system to a period like the day before yesterday, before you did any of this stuff, in which case it will do that. And hopefully your problem is solved, and now, of course, you need to think twice about installing whatever you did install, okay, because it's a possible problem. Or maybe you need to do something that we Americans tend to be real bad about. Before you install anything, you want to read the instructions. You don't want to basically run into a problem and say, oh my goodness, now I'm going to read the instructions because it didn't work out the way I hoped it would. There can be a world of difference between installing software and then plugging it in, okay, or if it's hardware, versus plugging it in and then installing the software, depending on what the instructions say. Doing one when it says do the other can cause a problem. There are also accessibility utilities to allow you to magnify, narrate, speech recognition. Uh, Before speech recognition was fairly well developed, and it's getting better all the time. People like Stephen Hawking, who has since passed away, when he wrote his first book, he's paralyzed from the neck down. Okay, he wrote a 900-page book holding a pencil in his mouth and pushing the eraser head. He basically typed out the pages of his book holding a pencil in his mouth. If you can imagine doing that, okay, versus speech recognition, where all he has to do is speak to the computer and it would automatically do whatever it tells it to do. It'll type stuff, it'll go to a website, open up an application, whatever. Okay, extra credit. If you want, you can go into your computer system software or whatever type you're using, probably Windows, but it doesn't have to be. Look up and go, if it's Windows 10, go into My Computer, right click on it, go down to Properties, okay, and it'll bring up and it'll tell you what kind of system software you have, a little bit about your system software versus the other types. It'll tell you if your operating system is 32-bit or 64-bit. And it'll usually have additional information like how much memory you have, how much storage space you have, things like that. A 100-word summary into Blackboard assignment 14, or if you're having trouble with that, you can email it to me within Blackboard preferably, or you can email it to me outside Blackboard as a last resort. Okay, we have talked a little bit about the functions of operating systems. We've talked a little bit about the different kinds of operating systems for machines, for networks, for business. We've talked a little bit about the more common operating systems for personal use. We've talked a little bit about how the operating system is, all it's there for is to provide a means for the users to interact with the computer. Most of us don't have a computer just to sit there on our desk. We have a computer or we have a phone or microwave oven or whatever to do things. And the operating system basically provides the window, if you will, or the tool to allow us to, hey, I want to see an application, or on our phone, to watch a movie or to text somebody or whatever. We've talked a little bit about how the operating system helps manage hardware, like the processor, like memory, like storage and peripheral devices. We've talked a little bit about how the operating system interacts with the application software. We've talked a little bit about the process the operating system uses to start up the computer and how errors in the boot process are handled. We've talked a little bit about some of the main features of the Windows interface, and I would really encourage you to go back and read through your chapters 1 and 2 of your skills book, which talk about Windows 10, which talk about the fundamental features of Windows 10 and the Windows Explorer the file management tool Windows Explorer. We've talked a little bit about the operating systems and how they can help keep your computer organized. We've talked a little bit about viewing, sorting, naming, and managing your files and folders. We have briefly mentioned file compression. It mostly is transparent to you. Be careful using it, and certainly don't send me any compressed files. We talked a little bit about some of the other tools that are available to you, and again, I refer you back to the first few chapters of your skills book. We've talked a little bit about the utilities that you can use to back up and restore files, and a little bit about the assistive technology utilities that you can use to make using your computer system easier. Okay, questions? Okay, things to think about. You want to read through Chapter 5, especially the review questions. In lab, if you're still working on getting your Word Lab quiz in from last week, go ahead and get it in so I can get it graded. This week we're working on Excel Chapter 2, 2.1 to 2.10. And bear in mind that in 2 weeks, it's coming up fast now because we're already on week 5. Okay, on week 6. Chapter 5. We're doing the midterm exam in 2 weeks, so you might want to start taking a look at the midterm exam review file, which is going to cover chapters 1 through 7. And it's, if I say so myself, kind of a cool tool. If you bring it up, it's going to look a lot like this. If you put it under slideshow, okay, it's going to look a lot like this. And then you bring it down to the various categories, and like say you click on chapter 1. The tools such as Facebook, Twitter, that enable groups to connect and exchange ideas is called, you click on it again, hopefully you'll guess first, what are your social networking tools? And you click on the U in the lower right hand corner, and it will bring it back up to the main screen, and you can pick another category and more points. This is kind of a cool way to study the material. Okay, subject to your questions, and I will be here, in class as well as online to answer them. Okay, this is a quick overview of Chapter 5.